She's taken some heat for her criminal justice record. So will Kamala Harris address her time as a prosecutor tonight? And how could it impact the campaign going forward? NBC News Now correspondent Dasha Burns looks back at some of Harris's controversial policy decisions.
Reject the false choice.
We can't accept false choices.
False choice, the false choice. It's a false choice.
False choice. That seems to be Kamala Harris's favorite line, and people interpret it in vastly different ways, either to describe how she refuses to be put in a box or how she refuses to commit to any particular policy. It also tells you about her approach to criminal justice, between being tough on crime and being a reformer. And that's been the case since she began her career in public service. When Harris became the DA of San Francisco in 2004, tough on crime policy was popular around the country. Even Joe Biden, who was pivotal in getting the 1994 crime bill passed a decade earlier, carried his enthusiasm about cracking down into the 2000s.
Fewer police on the street preventing crime and protecting community means more crime. And it's as simple as that. It's not rocket science. We went through this whole debate during the 80s and 90s.
But Harris claims that in the 2000s, she didn't flex laws like 3 strikes. She said as DA, her policy was only to pursue a 3rd strike if the crime was serious or violent. And yet she remained proud that the felony conviction rate rose during her tenure.
When we're talking about serious and violent crime, lock them up. In San Francisco, in my office, we've increased the conviction rates for the DA's office to the highest they've been in just under 15 years.
But her attempt to brand smart on crime policy goes beyond those serious and violent crimes. According to Mercury News, she had more convictions on marijuana charges than her predecessor. But she rarely put them in jail, preferring to send them to programs like her Back on Track initiative.
This is when there was a tough on crime mentality, and I created one of the first in the nation initiatives that was focused on re-entering former offenders by getting them jobs and training and counseling.
Her anti-truancy policy was the one that really turned some heads, threatening to charge parents if their children miss school.
I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned. As a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school.
She was elected California's Attorney General in 2011, and she expanded that program. Years later, she said this about the unintended consequences.
My regret is that I have now heard stories that where in some jurisdictions, DAs have criminalized the parents.
Right.
And I regret that that has happened.
In 2015, she required that police in the Justice Department wear body cameras, but refused to make them mandatory statewide. She created a first-of-its-kind database of deaths in police custody.
Why did I do that? Because I knew too often folks are talking anecdotally about what's wrong with the system and have not been given the data or try to claw it out of the system. And I said, nope, we're going to open this up.
But she declined to back a bill that would have required her office to investigate police shootings. By the time Harris became a senator in 2017, she became more vocal about progressive policies. She sponsored a bill that would decriminalize marijuana federally. But 9 years prior, she wrote an opposition argument against legalizing marijuana at the state level as San Francisco's district attorney, saying the measure, quote, seriously compromises the safety of our communities, roadways, and workplaces. As a senator, she also touted her efforts to end the cash bail system.
The only difference between someone being in jail pre-trial or being out is if they can afford to write a check.
When running for president, Harris outlined her desire to reform the criminal justice system, proposing ending mandatory minimum sentences on the federal level and encouraging independent investigations of officer-involved shootings. As the Biden campaign eyed her for the VP pick, protests over George Floyd and racial injustice were escalating, and she said this about defunding the police.
In many cities in America, over 1/3 of their city budget goes to police. What about the money going to social services? What about the money going to helping people with job training? What about helping with the mental health issues that communities are being plagued with, for which we're putting no resources?
Since she was chosen as Biden's running mate, the Trump administration has billed Harris as a, quote, radical, something those on the left dismiss, and they point to her record as a prosecutor as evidence. But now you know the facts.
It is all about thirds today, the third night of the Democratic National Convention. Kamala Harris becoming just the third woman in American history to stand up and accept the vice presidential nomination for a major party. Democratic National Committeeman Robert Zimmerman joining me now. Robert, what a treat to have you here.
So great to be with you.
The last time a woman accepted the VP nod, I love it. I love seeing you and your beautiful sunflowers. The last time a woman accepted the vice presidential nomination at the DNC was also the first, and that was back in 1984 with Geraldine Ferraro. You were there. Tell us about that historic night.
Well, and for the record, I was there as the youngest member of the New York delegation. I no longer have that title as the youngest member, but I was there, and it was
could have fooled me.
You made my day. You know, it was historic in the best sense. There was this sense of shock and excitement about this bold choice that Walter Mondale made, that very frankly, members of the Democratic Party establishment questioned and challenged. And from that euphoric moment at the convention where she was placed in nomination to acclamation, then the harsh reality of what being a first meant. The attacks she faced from women in the media who questioned her qualifications or whether she'd be a good mother. The attacks on her because of her Italian heritage. The attacks on her for a whole range of reasons about whether she was even qualified to be vice president or president, coming from sources you wouldn't expect. Members of the media, other Democrats, the establishment. And so that historic moment had enormous highs and also really rough awakenings for so many of us. But here we are today. And one of the reasons that this becomes, in a sense, the new normal, we hear that phrase a lot, but we see Kamala Harris as the first woman of color to be here, to be nominated. It's so on a national ticket for vice president. It's so profoundly significant because Jerry Ferraro and Shirley Chisholm and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, this breakthrough candidacy is now part of the mainstream. And because of so many young people who've really changed the process.
You know, Robert, I hear you say that, and I was thinking decades have passed. I mean, we are in another century. This should be so different. But to hear you talk about some of the difficulties that Geraldine Ferraro faced, we're dealing with some of those same issues today in 2020.
I'll tell you what the difference is. Young people today in the political process are now accepting and embracing and treat as normal the emergence of women in the political process. And we have a record number of senators who are women and House members and elected officials around our country who are women. We have a record number of LGBTQ elected officials in our country, Muslim officials. So while we see the same frustrations from the same reaction from the establishment, young people and new activists are changing it. I feel this is a gay man. I feel that Jerry Ferraro opened the doors for so many of us, not just who are women, but also in the gay community. And Kamala Harris's candidacy today is a tribute to that victory.
Let me ask you this. This convention, we have said over and over again, it's making history on so many levels.
Yeah.
What do you make of the first virtual DNC? What is working, do you think? And what is missing because the party is not together?
Well, I'll tell you, let's be frank, Allison, this is a high-risk venture. Nobody knew how this was going to work out. No one knew if the technology was going to work. And quite honestly, it's been I think, an unqualified success. It's been a stunning success. There have been, the roll call last night was inspiring and moving. When we go back to a normal convention, I hope we keep that kind of roll call. I think the keynote speech lost something the way it was chopped up with different individuals giving sentences. But I think the idea of telling the story of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris through everyday people's lives, how they relate to everybody out there, how they relate to the challenges Americans face, really is a way of introducing them and shows the importance of this venture, because empathy is really what it's about, especially against the Trump presidency.
Robert, tonight we'll hear from Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. What will you be watching for there?
Well, now and Ali Vitale made the point very well. It's really now where we lay out the policies and the strategies and what we stand for in this election. People dismiss conventions in the political discourse, but it's when really our country stops and looks and pays close attention to what's happening. And it's really when people start focusing on the presidential election. So it's not just to rally the party base. It's also to reach out to the many people who are undecided or people who are part of the mainstream who don't really normally engage. So Barack Obama can testify uniquely as to how qualified Joe Biden is to lead our nation in these difficult times. And I think that gives him a unique place. And Hillary Clinton has an important message to give, both what she faced in the last campaign and how we can overcome it now in this election.
So tomorrow we'll hear from Joe Biden. What do you think America needs to hear from him?
You know, we need to hear a path forward. Ali Vitale was totally on target. We've had lots of position papers issued, lots of policy statements issued. But now we have to hear from him personally, hear his vision for the future, hear his plans, and see him be able to build that bridge between not just the progressive community and the political mainstream, but also talk about how he can give our country back its confidence. By every polling data, America feels they're on the wrong track. By every analysis, our government is really hollowed out by the Trump presidency. And we're facing a much bigger debate in our country than Democrat versus Republican. We're witnessing a threat to our democracy under the Trump presidency. President Trump's own former advisors acknowledge that, like General Mattis. So it's up to Joe Biden now as our nominee to give us a path forward, how we can reclaim really the ideals of America.
Robert, we didn't just hear from Democrats this week. I think one of the biggest things was that we also heard from Republicans like Colin Powell and John Kasich backing Joe Biden. The RNC starts next week. What do the Republicans need to do to tell their story, to get their momentum going, to attempt to do better than the DNC ahead of November? How do they top this week?
You know, it's a really interesting distinction between both political parties that has, I think, gotten lost in the media. Democrats chose, instead of having a balloon drop, which I love them too, I must confess, they chose to put public safety and health and science first. And they chose to focus on safety and recognizing the need to protect each other and protect our country in the pandemic. The Republicans are going to have over 500 people gather in North Carolina for several days before they disperse on Tuesday, 336 delegates, plus the accompanying staff. And then Donald Trump's putting together another crowd in Washington. At the end of the day, the only person Donald Trump is protecting in his convention is Donald Trump and putting everyone else at risk. It tells you everything you need to know about Donald Trump's priorities and where the Republican Party is. Their challenge simply is this. They have lost the integrity to have a credible message. They have a president whose weakness, a president whose cowardice and his lack of leadership has really defined the Republican Party. And far worse than Donald Trump's behavior are the enablers in the Republican Party in the House and Senate, who know what he's doing is wrong and corrupt and incompetent, but are afraid to take him on. So the challenge they have in their party is really the fact that they've lost their soul and they've lost their principles. They're not going to reclaim it in a convention.
Robert, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your historical perspective. Looking back on 1984, you will forever in our hearts be the youngest Democratic National Committeeman.
You made my day. Thank you so much.
See you soon. Thanks, Robert.
Look forward to it.
Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi all set to speak tonight at the Democratic National Convention. But day 3 is really all about Kamala Harris, who will officially accept the vice presidential nomination, becoming the first black and Asian American woman on a major party's presidential ticket. NBC News political reporter Ali Vitale joining me now from Wilmington, Delaware. Ali, it is a huge night. Give us a preview. What are you expecting to hear from Kamala Harris?
Allison, I'm told that her remarks are going to press for inclusivity as well as telling her story while making the case for Joe Biden. And really what tonight is it's an introduction of Kamala Harris, not the senator, not the former presidential candidate, but Joe Biden's running mate. And that's going to be true for both people who knew her in the primary and who know her from her time on Capitol Hill, and also for those voters who are just tuning in, because you got to remember these convention audiences, the theory is that it's twofold. It's people who are party faithful and people who are just coming to check out what the party's doing as it heads into the general election. Of course, history is going to be the backdrop tonight, and you see it in the speakers that precede Harris in the speaking lineup. The first black president of our country, Barack Obama, the first woman nominated to a major party ticket, Hillary Clinton, both of them going to be giving sharp rebukes of Trump, but also making the case for Joe Biden. And then, of course, Kamala Harris. The thing that's notable to me in her speech is her advisors have told us that this is going to be a set of remarks where she hopes that many Americans can see themselves in it. And so what that says to me is that, yes, she's going to speak to the history, but as she's done over the course of the last week and a half that she's been the vice presidential nominee, she's also going to seek to normalize her role. She's trying to say that it's not abnormal. In fact, it should be the usual that a woman of color is in this role of executive leadership. And so it's always a double-edged sword. People really want to speak to the history, and that's very important. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who want to just normalize this as much as possible. And I imagine those are going to be the two competing themes that we see from Kamala Harris tonight.
Allie, Jill Biden, Sally Yates made the case for Joe Biden last night. Here's what they've been saying about him today.
The message was that Joe is going to heal this country just like he healed our family.
You know, when I think about this election, to me, it all really comes down to who do you trust? Who do you trust to put the country first? Who do you trust to live up to our values? And who do you trust to tell us the truth? Joe Biden, has all of those things.
So, Allie, next up is Barack Obama tonight. How will he make the case for Joe Biden to take the Oval Office?
We've seen sort of previews of what this could look like in ads that the Biden ticket has put out, or even in that video meeting that they did of Barack Obama and Joe Biden meeting in Washington, D.C. just a few weeks ago. But what we're going to see here is Barack Obama introducing Joe Biden not as his number two, but as his own person on the ticket. Joe Biden has been in the national consciousness for decades as a senator, yes, but then most recently as a very popular vice president to a popular Democratic president. Barack Obama is still the most popular person, if you look at the polls, in the Democratic Party. So really a very good messenger for him tonight. But really, Joe Biden as the top of the ticket, that's what's new tonight. And over the course of these next few nights, tomorrow when he accepts the nomination, and as we've seen throughout the DNC, this is the same Joe Biden, but it's also looking at him through a new framework because he's no longer number two, he's number one, the top of that ticket.
Allie, I thought of you last night when we saw a few balloons next to the Bidens. I thought, could they just drop those balloons? Allie Vitale would love it. I was hoping for you. I know there have been some... I know you're missing it. I know there have been some surprises, some musical performances, some unexpected things. What else should we be watching for tonight? What other key issues do you think will be front and center tonight?
If I can just be synonymous with the joy of balloon dropping, then I guess I will have done my job here, Allison. So I'm very happy that you thought of me when that came close last night. But look, I think last night we did get to see that whimsical roll call taking us literally around the country, showing the diversity of America. I thought
cool.
That was really great, even if there were very few balloons. But I also think that tonight, while the last two nights have provided sort of loftier ideals, conversations about morality and leadership, we haven't really heard too much substance in terms of policy. And so tonight, what we're thinking we're going to see is we're going to hear conversations, whether it's video pieces or live remarks about issues that really dominated the Democratic primary, things like immigration, climate change, the economy, all issues that Democrats are going to have to lay a path forward on, and that Joe Biden's plans, while he has them, haven't necessarily been discussed. And so I imagine we're going to start hearing people talk about that, and also Kamala Harris talking about those plans. So as much as this is a convention that's meant to press the larger ideals of the party, there are a lot of voters, especially the ones who are the party faithful, who have been following this process from its conception in the start of the primary. They do want to hear about the policy path forward. They still do care about that as much as policy number one is beating Donald Trump. And so tonight, I think we're finally going to get a little bit more of a taste of that than we've gotten in the last few nights, Allison.
Mm-hmm. Allie, I love that roll call, too, and I'm going to completely out my husband here, who has been known to fall asleep on the couch during the convention. It had his full attention. We were totally into it. Just a reminder of the great diversity of our country. And I have to tell you, we may not have balloon drops, but anytime I see Allie Vitale in the Rundown on News Now, it is a balloon drop for me. So thank you for being with us.
Thanks, my friend.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.